My aim is to try to capture the arc of your career. So
Mhm.
I want to let you talk as much or as little as you wish, and start at the beginning. And the beginning is when you were growing up. What was the sort of context or environment that you were growing up in?
Uh, so I'm a child of the '60s, born in 1960, and my father was a eventually he was a tech writer. Um, Early in his career, he worked for something called the National Radio Institute, which was a correspondence course for GIs returning from World War II. It was a paid correspondence course, very large operation in the US at that time. And he wrote some of the materials that you would basically set up to be on this course, and you would uh, receive something in the mail periodically every week or every month or what have you. And then periodically you'd also get a kit of something to assemble and do tests with and learn from. So it was a correspondence course in electronics, all different kinds. And so growing up, there was all of that stuff around. He would bring home all of those manuals. When before I went to university, I had literally thousands of the little booklets. They were little trade size booklets, 3 millimeters thick, maybe, and just thousands of them. Most of them, I think, the minute I went off to university, my parents backed a truck up and unloaded everything and got rid of everything I had. So, so that was one of the things that got chucked out. I did rescue a few, the ones that I thought that he might have written. Somehow I had the wherewithal to actually separate those out from the others. But anyway, so I always had things to read. My dad was always bringing home electronics books, and so I always had interesting stuff to read that was just, started at a very young age. I mean, there's a family story of me uh, at the age of 2 pulling the tubes out of the back of a TV set with the power still turned on, and my mother getting to me just before I got to the one with the big wire on the top. I started pretty early, but had certainly shown an interest in electronics from an early age. Um, so that
Yeah.
was the beginning of things.
And then you went to
The
school.
Well, yeah. So I'll back up just a little bit before that, because it feeds sort of I was thinking about what I might say and what the arc of things is, and there are a couple of things that I think help to understand how I got into audio and more broadly into electronics. And one of them was when I was in high school, age 14 or thereabouts. I talked my way into being the repair person for a music store. And so I would go to the music store and I would get whatever they had that week, a couple of guitar amps, maybe a, a, a Wurlitzer, a few other things like that, and take them home and fix them and give them a little bill and take them back. And so I did that for quite a while and learned a lot about how to fix things. Uh, and so that was kind of the beginning of a theme that's gone through my whole career. University was Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech, which was a pretty good school, and did so I was in the School of Electrical Engineering, which is now called something completely different now. Everybody has gone to more the computer direction. When I went to school, it was still pretty much the old school engineering, and did did my 4 years there. Learned obviously a lot of stuff, and had some great professors at the time. Barely squeaked out. I had gone in with the idea that maybe I'll get a master's and maybe I'll get a PhD. And by the end of 4 years, I was so glad to get out. So, because I was more attracted to the making of things than the academic side of things. I think I always chafed a bit at the academic aspect of it. But I studied with some great people. The few of them that I remember by name, Marshall Leach, you may or may not know.
I
He
remember.
was, yeah, so he was somebody that I took some courses with, and he was the transient intermodulation distortion guy. So he had come up with that kind of distortion, which eventually is mostly is discovered over time. Eventually, is mostly a function of slew rate, but he had discovered this thing and sort of promoted the idea and did a lot of work with that. Uh, uh, Rob Feeney was another one who was an RF guy. So I have a pretty active RF background. So that I got a lot of that with him.
When you
John Peatman. I'm
when
sorry.
you're talking about RF, what sort of band were you working in? AM, FM, HF?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I mean, my first job outside of after university was in the defense world, designing radar receivers. So
Okay.
DC to daylight, as you might call it. Um, so lots of microwave, but also I've worked on all kinds of receivers, not so much transmitters, repairing them from time to time. The joke I've always told after university was that I had gotten a degree in advanced amateur radio, because I spent too much of my time in the uh, the W4AQL Radio Shack, and I was in charge of the repeater, the 2 meter repeater, and repairing stuff, and shack manager, and doing all kinds of stuff along those lines. Instead of, maybe I should have spent more time studying, but you do what you do.
You
So
you were
mhm.
mentioning another mentor
uh,
teacher.
John Peatman, who is professor that had worked at HP quite a bit, and he was the one that kind of introduced me to microprocessors. So one of the things I've always tended to do was, while I do a lot of analog and a lot of audio, my real interest is in mixed signal. So much of what I have done and still do is analog up to some point, and then something digital, either to control or to turn it into digital audio, for example, for audio. But the microprocessors have just started to show up when I was getting out of university. So they provided a way to kind of perfect analog in some interesting ways. And so I've done a lot of that. So he was a big influence in that direction.
You're inspired by a range of things, and not specifically audio, but all the interfaces that we now consider normal.
Yeah, sure.
You went to university then, and you studied at that university. What influenced your particular choice of university?
Well, partly opportunism. I was accepted into a few different universities. One was MIT, which I wanted to go to, but that was conditional acceptance at the time, which meant that they didn't have a slot for me. I would have to have waited a year to go. And Georgia Tech was also one that I was accepted into, and they were it was much more accessible. I also think that was a better choice maybe for me. Obviously, you don't know because you choose a path, and that's the path you know. But something about Georgia Tech is that they are very hands-on oriented. You're um, uh, it's very much a roll up your sleeves and make something kind of a university. A lot of students, although I didn't, a lot of students do instead of a 4-year degree, it'd be a 5-year degree where every other semester you were working in the industry. It's called a co-op degree. I sort of tended to work in parallel, and probably would have done better if I'd been done the co-op thing, but I think I was a little too um, anxious to get going. So, but that's the uh, sort of the beginning of the university experience, and I have thought about going back and getting some other degree, but never really not pursued it actively. Um, I was going to say one of the things that's a defining characteristic for me is that I've had a bit of a nonlinear career because I've tended to go and do things that interested me. So I did a lot of RF stuff because that interested me. I've done a lot of audio stuff because that interested me. I've gone out of engineering completely, spent 10 years in the film industry because I was very interested in that. Became, studied to be a cinematographer and worked in the production side of things in film. Since that doesn't pay very much, at the same time, I was also working in uh, sort of on the side, doing engineering.
Um, that seems to be an idiosyncratic, if I could put it that way, choice of career. How did your degree help to modify the choices that you made?
Well, having the degree meant that I could make whatever choices I wanted to. I wasn't stuck into doing a certain thing. And in fact, I had, when I was studying, I took a more coursework than was required to graduate because there were things I was interested in and wanted to study, but made choices about how many of those courses I would take sort of strategically. Because, for example, I took a lot of digital electronics courses, and in fact, I took enough courses in computer engineering, which is how you design a computer, essentially, the architecture. I took enough of those that if I had taken one more course, I would have had a minor in computer engineering. My concern at the time was if I did that, I was worried I would be pigeonholed into being only able to get jobs along those lines. So I did a bit of, I do a lot of work in something that I was interested in, but then made the choice to just get a straight BSW degree without the extra letters that might follow it, so that I had the freedom to go and do anything I was interested in.
It seemed like you had little in the way of mentors influencing your choice. It was purely you deciding where you wanted to go.
Yeah, I was one of those kids that had a pretty good idea of what he wanted to do when he was younger. So I didn't really have to discover along the way. I kind of self-motivated. Uh,
So that general
so
degree provided scope to tackle a lot of different career
yeah,
options.
it was a standard doubly degree without the computer engineering, or there were some other things that were popular at the time that would tend to shunt you down a particular road. Uh, and I chose not to limit myself that way.
So the range of jobs that you had after you graduated, what sort of jobs as examples could you give?
Well, the as I say, the first one was in the defense world, designing radar receivers, which was a great experience because it taught me a discipline that I've used ever since. Um, you have to be very disciplined in that world. They force it on you. You will follow certain rules. You will use the parts that are listed. You can't just go say, "Hey, I found this new part. I'm going to use this." I mean, like, no, that's not a qualified part. So you learn very fast how to um, design interesting things with a fairly limited range of parts. And at the time, I became in the in that division that I was in, I became sort of known as the phase lock loop guy, because I had cracked the code for doing phase lock loops. I could churn one out in just no time. Uh, and and so when they figured out whoever was interested in, they needed a phase lock loop that ran at X frequency, such and such a step size, and so on. They just be like, well, let's give it to this guy. He can just do it. And so I did a rather large number of those over time. But the defense world is focused on paperwork to a large degree. There's a lot of documentation and precious little making stuff. And you can imagine somebody who's wired to make things had trouble with that over time. So I lasted about 3 years and then went out on my own.
And what did you
And
do?
I started a little consulting business, and it it was me basically, but I had a few subcontractors that would do some things for me, but mostly it was me. And I did turnkey design work in all kinds of fields. There was some audio in there. There was some weird video in there. There's uh, a things that were used for testing pipes in nuclear reactors, a test set for that. It's an endless amount of different weird stuff. So I guess the bottom line is all kinds of interesting and unusual design work. Um, and I did that for quite a long time. That eventually evolved into a bit larger operation. We had offices in, at the time, I was in Dallas, Texas, and we had another office back in Atlanta with a partner who did a lot of work as well. And that eventually, we did a lot of things. That was about the time that I also started getting into more into the pro audio side of things, if you will. These Some of my friends from university and my partner in before we became business partners called me up and said, "Hey, there's this new thing called MIDI, and go buy this thing called a DX7, which had just come out. And we're going to start a company and we're going to make some MIDI stuff." And I'm like, okay, let me go look. And so I found a DX7 for sale at a mom and pop piano shop, piano and organ. And they didn't know what the heck this thing was. Yamaha had shipped it to them, and they're like, "We don't even know what it is." So I took it off their hands, and we designed various MIDI products and we didn't know how to run a business, to be honest, how to do that sort of thing. So this was my first foray that went down in flames. We ended up at one point where we had the bills came in, and the bank account basically was equal to the bills for all of the stuff we had been doing, and it just went poof and ceased to exist, and off into the next phase of my career. Uh, but that was the first real spin at trying to start a business, and we learned an awful lot about how not to do things, which is
I-
a
The
big
story,
part of learning how to do this.
the story that you're telling is about experience more than education. You had a foundation to start with, then you worked in an apprenticeship type environment in the defence organisation, and then
Mhm.
you branched out on your own and met the challenges of trying to be an entrepreneur without the skills to do that. So you learnt on the job. And
Yeah,
what you
well, and there aren't any courses, certainly back then. There are no courses on how to do any of that, how to be an entrepreneur. There are lots of people who will tell you they have the secret to it, but the only way that you ever learn it is you go do it and you make mistakes, and then you learn the next time, I'm not going to make those mistakes. I'll make some different ones this time. And that's how it's done. There's no magic, and there's no coursework that I've ever heard of for learning how to do that.
There are courses in business and business development that do
Oh,
address that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, yes, yes. But
you know,
this is a little bit different. This is not necessarily how do you run a business. I did learn how to do that, and I have done that, and we can talk about a bit of that. But this is how do you come up with an idea? How do you figure out what the market is, what the market wants? How do you make that thing for a price that you can sell it for? How do you market that thing? How do you fulfill those orders? All of those things are, yes, you'll find aspects of that in a business course, but if you go get an MBA, you will not know how to do any of those things. You will know how to run a division of an existing company, which is quite a lot. But starting from, I don't know, I just have an idea, to I'm able to make a living doing that thing, is requires you to learn how to make those mistakes. And most people who've gone through that, I think, have had similar experiences to me. You learn by making mistakes in that world.
you mentioned that you were going to talk about some aspect of courses in business. Did you do any courses at all on the way through?
No, I never did, but I have uh, pretty. I mean, early on, I had to learn how to. Even in my first job, I had people who worked for me, the various techs who would be assigned to you as an engineer, and you had to learn how to manage uh, those at the time, those guys, being that that sort of time of our existence. The uh, all through my career, I have gone in and out of being at a company or being independent. And when I've been at various companies, I have usually had teams to manage. The last one that I worked for was Avid Technology. I worked for M Audio in particular, and eventually also ran the engineering department for Digidesign, which is these are all part of the same company basically. And so I had ran that group, which was 60 or 70 people at the most. So pretty good sized group all over the world. And so that was kind of the biggest one that I've run, but that's managing an entire engineering team. And all the processes to get a product from some loose definition onto shelves in the store.
That's a pretty impressive product. I started with Pro Tools 1 and Soundforce, so I understand, or Sound Designer, I think I started with.
Yeah,
So I
right.
understand the technology that you were working with.
Excellent.
Uh, you've started with an eclectic background that included radar and electronics and computers and a whole lot of stuff. What
Mhm.
fired your interest in audio, and how did you build your expertise into that interest?
Uh, when I was a kid, I had some, let's use the technical term, crappy old guitar, something that had been handed down and butchered over the years, that I ended up with, but no guitar amp. And so my interest was in trying to make noise. Uh, so I started, we didn't have really very much money. not for anything like that. So there was an electronic shop somewhere nearby I could walk to, and they had a dumpster in the back, and I would fish things out of the dumpster and try to fix them and get them to work and make noise. So I was using AM radios to try to make guitar amps, and one of the more successful ones was a chassis out of a tube TV set, which happens to have a actually pretty nice little power amplifier for audio in it. And so that's probably where I got started with doing that, and then managed to get a tape recorder and a microphone or two, and started playing with that. And by the time I was early teens, synthesizers were starting to be available on some level. And I was building bits out of, and I never know quite how to say the name. You may know it, PAIA, PAIA, I think.
Don't know.
May not have made it here. They were a father and son who had, and they're still around, believe it or not, who had started making kits for synthesizers. They'd publish a magazine article on some part of it, and they'd have a little kit you could buy for cheap and make something. And so I was making bits of that, doing things like that. And so this is all around making sound and recording sound, and mostly interested in the music side of things.
So it was an interest rather than a career at the start, but it was an
As a
interest that,
as a teenager, sure.
yeah, but it was an
Sure.
interest that you parlayed into a career ultimately.
Ultimately, it's been one of those parts of my interest that has always been strong and always been there, and I have weaved in and out of in some way through my whole career. So sometimes I would be doing something that didn't seem to be particularly audio related, but then eventually I would find my way back into doing something that was audio uh, somewhere along the way.
What are the significant audio projects that you've worked on? Just some examples.
Oh,
Obviously,
I
Pro
work.
Tools.
Yeah, I didn't. The software side of things was not part of what I did with Avid and Digi and M Audio. I'm a hardware guy, so um, the story there is I had done some work for somebody, the guy who founded M Audio when they were still very early in their business. I had uh, prior to meeting Tim Ryan, who had started M Audio, I had worked for a competitor of his called Music Quest, and we made MIDI interfaces, and I had written device drivers for MIDI for both Windows and the Mac. So some of the very early device drivers for MIDI and on Windows for sure. And so I had written one for him after I left MusicQuest. I wrote a driver for him that allowed them to make a lot of different products for MIDI. And so after I'd been in the film industry for quite a while and was very tired of being broke all the time, I called him up, found I still had his business card, called him up and I said, "Hey, Tim, what have you got going on?" And he said, "I need you here." And so I eventually was hired to take over hardware side of M Audio, and that role expanded fairly quickly to all of the engineering for M Audio, and then eventually the hardware side of Digidesign. Um, and they had M Audio had been sold to Digidesign just prior to my coming on board, and the design pipeline had gotten stalled in this process, as sometimes happens. And so Tim brought me in to sort of restart that, and to give it a little more of a rigorous process to get products going. So eventually we were turning out 2 complete products every month, kind of on a regular schedule. Not just variations of a product, but completely new products every month. And this was all hardware. So this was audio interfaces, music keyboards, either with sound generation or without, just as controllers, monitor speakers, microphones at one point, um, all kinds of stuff. So I didn't do a lot of the design there. I sort of guided the whole process. But you ask what sort of audio projects had I done? So in the process of my um, uh, consulting business, which went on for more than 15 years in some form or other, um, one of the projects was um, I'm trying to, this is actually a software project. Laurie Anderson, the artist, had an album called Puppet Motel, and she had published a Mac CD-ROM early in the CD-ROM days of an interactive, not a game, but it was an interactive world for that album called Puppet Motel. And it had been successful enough that they wanted to do a Windows version of it using the same assets. So they already had all of the audio and all of the animation already done, and they're just wanted to port it to Windows. So I wrote a basically an emulation of the Mac audio engine that ran on Windows, so they could just take the Mac assets and they just ran as if they were on a Mac. So that was one of, as they say, you run into all kinds of odd kinds of things that somebody wants to get done.
Still a significant project.
It was a pretty good project, and it actually worked quite well. That CD-ROM never made it out.
So in addition to your technical background, you've had a fairly extensive business background, both as a manager of people and of technologies inside companies, and operating your own company. So you would know a fair bit about starting a company, running a company, and end of life of a company.
Absolutely.
Are there any significant events that have come out of that?
Well, I've done this several times. One of the sort of part of the interest in, as it turned out, in the film industry was that I learned how to do exactly what you described over and over again. Essentially, what a film production is it's a startup that you hire a lot of people and you run that company for 3 to 6 months, and then you shut it down. And I did that a number of times and learned uh, pretty well how that process works. And it's not that dissimilar to starting a technology company or any other kind of company. The process is much the same. And so that was a great school, especially to learn it on somebody else's dime than my own. Um, Over the years, I've started a number of audio related companies. After I left Avid, I started a audio it, it, test equipment company called Avermetrics. And the business model was aimed at uh, test and measurement on a production line, because I identified that there's a problem where in order to test products on the production line, what you end up doing is you end up buying a lot of quite expensive desktop, benchtop test gear and shipping it to a factory, generally in Asia, never to be seen again, to test your product. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity to make something that is designed for purpose at a much lower end cost to do that job. And we designed a couple of systems. One was a fairly elaborate uh, multi-channel test system that could test not just audio, but also things like power supplies and do process control and a lot of different things, all of it networked. And then pivoted from that to making a benchtop analyzer, uh, which was, I think, a very good product. The one difficulty we had was that the software was quite different for that environment than what you would use in a production environment. And we ran out of money before we could get the software quite where it needed to be. So the people who have them love them, but it just couldn't quite keep the funding going to do that, which is a classic business startup problem to have.
Typically, you work for someone, you've done that. You build your business, you've done that. You've consulted, you've done that. When you've finished that, what are the sort of achievements that you can look back on and say that you've really achieved, particularly in the field of audio, but generally over that career?
Uh, you mean in terms of particular products, or
What do you
uh,
consider as your most successful achievement?
hmm. The thing I get the most thrill out of, it's sort of anticlimactic in a way, is I get the kick from having made something that worked, because that's the journey. You start out very enthusiastic on a new project, and you design some architecture and you start to design the product, and you're working away on it, and at some point you're trying to figure out, why did you ever decide to get into doing this product? Will it ever end? And then eventually you make the thing work, and that getting something to work is what gets me uh, up in the morning. So it's trying to narrow down, as I've done a lot of odd things. I guess some of the more recent, really audio related things is I've done a lot of the digital audio designs for a company in the US called Dangerous Music. This is very high-end studio recording equipment. And so basically everything that they make that has a digital audio component to it is something I've designed. And they're quite successful in that world. They're very well known. They'd make a lot of other gear than just the digital audio part of it, but that's a big part of that, and that's been a lot of fun to do because it's design um, with where performance quality is the most important thing. Price is secondary to that.
What sort of
Uh,
product are you talking about? A digital recorder, a
so
multi-track?
so if there are a series of things called converts that they have, there's a two-channel convert, which is it's in this case it's a DAC, a two-channel DAC that it has metering in it and can accept inputs from all kinds of sources, analog, AES3, Toslink optical, um, USB, and so on. And you can switch between those various inputs without dropping a sample. So it can switch very quickly and it can resync to whatever input is currently active very quickly. That's paired with another uh, o- o- product of that same line, which is an 8-channel DAC, which you would use in when you're, say, tracking or doing mix down, because you could send your stems out, those 8 stems, and then they have an external line mixer which is meant to work with that uh, for doing mixing outside of the Pro Tools box, which is sort of where Dangerous got its start. Uh, was that idea. Um, and then there's a ADC, which is based on the stuff that I did, but another colleague of mine actually did the design work because I wasn't available. That's a called the AD plus. That is the other end of that chain. So you would run your 8 stems out into a line mixer and take 2 channels of that back into your Pro Tools session, and that would be your mix. So you do the mix outside of the box, in effect, where you don't have headroom problems, and but you're still running it in a Pro Tools session.
The world has changed since you started in your career by playing with your father's technology and building guitar amplifiers out of old TV sets. What sort of change have you witnessed over that long time? And do you think it has benefited the world of audio?
Oh, that's a big question. So yes, it's changed quite a lot from uh, vacuum tubes back when I was quite young, to discrete solid state, to it's all rolled up into a few ICs now. And the shift from doing things in a completely analog way to trying to digitize the audio essentially at the microphone, which they basically now do with varying results. Huge changes in terms of the technology. I think that um, some of the changes have also been in terms of the software, if you will, the compression algorithms that allow you to stream audio at reasonably good quality audio over very low bandwidth media. Um, so those are all fairly massive changes in the way things are done. Um, I, in some ways, I feel a little bit responsible for, although I'm really not, it's not really fair, but I feel a little responsible for maybe the good and the bad of um, the studio in your bedroom aspect of the way that music is created now. A lot of what we did at M Audio and prior to that at Music Quest was to make to give the ability to create music in in a very inexpensive way. So whereas in the 70s and in the 80s, you might need a $1 million studio to record your album, for $79.95, you can go into a store and buy a audio interface and some software, and you can start to record things at home. And that's I think been both a good thing and maybe not so good thing. It's given a lot of people an outlet to do things and express themselves. At the same time, it's flooded us with a lot of things that bury the special things that you might find in a sea of content.
Uh,
And
the social media has largely done that, and there's a lot of misinformation and bad stuff out there. But one
sure.
of the things that I've noticed is that schools now can take a computer, a piece of software like Tenacity, a couple of microphones, and they can teach
Mhm,
kids how to build multi-channel audio
mhm,
from their music courses that they're doing. So you're turning
absolutely.
out musicians now at 14, 15, 16, 18, who are already competent studio technicians who can record their music and perform it live and do all of those things. And that's something that would have been almost impossible back in the Bill Armstrong days, for example, where you needed to spend
Sure.
millions of dollars on multi-track tape recorders. I think
Absolutely.
someone talked about an 8-track tape recorder costing $80,000,
Mhm,
something like that, which was out of the range of almost everybody. Now I have it on my cheap little $2,000 laptop. I run Tenacity and it's got 64 channels. I've got an audio
sure.
interface. I can plug a microphone in and I can do whatever I want. And I've even got
Mhm,
radio microphones that digitize, as you say, the microphone.
mhm, mhm.
So the world has obviously changed and you have seen it all. Do you think it's really been for the better?
Well, that's what I'm torn because those are all good things. But the uh, one of the things that that old studio world had the benefit of is that there was a filter that would select people for talent, typically, not always, but typically for talent, and there would and so it would funnel them into that stream in a focused way. the alternative that we have now is that everybody can do it, and so everybody does, and not everybody is name whoever your favorite musician is. They're who they are, but they're maybe not Elton John or name anyone
My
that you can
favorite
think
is
of.
Chet. My favorite is Chet Atkins.
Chet Atkins, absolutely. So would Chet Atkins have risen to be Chet Atkins in a world in which you could you could watch YouTube videos for an endless period of time and never see two people again, see someone twice in that period of time because there's so much content. It's an issue. There's nothing that is there's no filter that's selecting, so we get everything. So it's good that it's not someone else isn't deciding it, but it's impossible to decide this for yourself as well. Nobody has enough time to listen to everybody. So it's a mixed result, I'm afraid.
Given that opinion, do you think your career has been satisfying to you, and why?
Well, I've certainly had a great time, and I'm not quite done yet. Uh, so I've enjoyed doing it. There have been periods in my life when I didn't enjoy it so much, um, but then found my way back to it because I'm sort of drawn to doing things like this. Like to design stuff and make it work, and audio has been the constant through all of this. Uh, and so I have fun still doing it. And
I have
yeah.
two last questions before our time runs out shortly.
Uh,
What would you suggest a new entrant to the industry do if they wanted to take up a career like this? And the second question is about your involvement in the AES. Did that start early on,
mhm,
or is it only recently?
mhm. So with regard to the AES, I did join it pretty early. I don't even know what year it would have been. There, as I say, because my career has gone in and out, I've probably not been a constant member. I think there were probably some periods of time when I was not. Uh, Probably in the mid '90s, I probably was not, but I don't remember. But I started early because AES has been a source of information to me that I've found invaluable. There, the journals, the library, the people that I've met, know, going to the AES shows and conferences, being involved in panels at AES, and so on, has given me access to information that you otherwise don't have. I think that's one of the most valuable things that AES brings, is that knowledge base and those people. Um, with regard to what characteristics somebody, or what somebody should uh, uh, try and do to get into the industry, I would suggest something that's maybe unusual, because it's what served me very well in my life, which is uh, to get yourself into trouble. Uh, I have repeatedly, from probably an early age, talked my way into situations where I was not qualified because they interested me, and I managed to do it. And then you find out what it is to really engineer, how you solve problems. Because when you're confronted with, I have no idea what to do, but I now have to do it, you will figure it out. The most memorable time of doing that was I was a freshman at a university, second semester freshman, and somebody put up an ad on the job board for someone to help with some electronics for a medical research experiment. And I'm like, okay, I'll call. And I went and interviewed and I talked my way into this job. And I had no clue what to do. It was essentially a servo controlled system that would do movements at very small, very controlled movements at a very high rate and measure all kinds of parameters. And I hadn't had the coursework yet. So I had to figure out how to design a servo loop and make it work and be stable before I'd had the coursework, so that by the time I got to that part of my engineering education, it was a breeze. I already had done it. And so I've done that over and over all through my life. Get myself into trouble, figure out how to get out. And I have found that the best way to live life. That if somebody says no to you, figure out a way to turn that into a yes. Even if you don't know everything that you need to know, because you'll learn it. A little bit of stress is the best teacher I've ever had.
Yeah. That seems to be a lovely point to end on. I want to thank you for making the time to contribute to this series of interviews and to telling your
I'm glad to
story,
do it. Yeah.
which is a
Mhm.
fascinating one. Thank you again.